Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and I finally finished the entire series of Symphogear, all seasons. And since I shared my thoughts on it when I first started and when I was about halfway through it, I figured I would share my thoughts on it now that I've seen it from start to finish. Maybe an in-depth review will be warranted one day, but for now, these are just my thoughts on what I think of it now that I've gotten through it the first time. Also, just like in the last video, if you hear any sort of sounds of nature, it's because I have the windows open again. It's nice that spring is finally here, you know? So there are 5 seasons of Symphogear. There's the first season, which is simply Symphogear, then Symphogear G, Symphogear GX, Symphogear AXS, and Symphogear XV. No particular meaning to any of those letter acronyms, by the way, as far as I've seen, but it just serves to distinguish them, so for the sake of clarity, rather than go Season 1, Season 2, and so on through this review, I'll be referring to the first season as Symphogear and every subsequent season by its letter suffix. So, now that I've gotten to the end anyway, what do I think? I thought it was definitely good. When I first heard about the premise that it was some sort of crazy sci-fi action musical with a weird mixture of super dark drama but also just being a bat guano insane concept, I thought, that sounds crazy, but it sounds like my kind of crazy. And when I saw the series for the first couple episodes, I thought, yeah, it is my kind of crazy. Now that I've gotten to the end, I think that the series kind of can be graded on a curve in a way. Or at least if you were to line them up, it would make a curve. Because the first season, they were just figuring things out. They didn't quite have the budget to fully realize certain things. So the animation looked a little wonky at times. But it still did a good job of introducing the premise. With G, the second season, they finally had money to work with and things really spiked in quality. GX was the best it could possibly have been. Struck a good balance with the character elements and the story elements, good emotion running throughout it, tied up a lot of plot threads, definitely had some great music. It was the height of what Symphogear as a series could be. And then with AXS and XV, the quality started to drop again. Not to the point where it became unwatchable, but it still took a bit of a downturn. So that was unfortunate, but still, overall, it was really good. Someone's running some kind of machine outside. Still not closing the windows. I think the reason I feel this way about Symphogear getting better right until the midway point and then going back down again is because for the first 3 seasons, there was more of a balance struck between character elements and plot elements, and they came together in a way that felt natural. And it really felt like, even though this is a completely ridiculous concept of warrior Valkyries singing their own battle themes as they beat the snot out of these weird creatures, that at the very least it took itself just seriously enough that you never really questioned it, yet also knew what it was, so it's hard to explain. Basically, it had a sincerity to it that won me over. It never treated its concept as outright stupid, but it still knew that what drew you in was how stupid it could get without losing you. And the peak of that, like I said, was with GX. It had everything you could possibly want from that series, and mixed it all together in just the right way. It also had the Beef Stroganoff song, that's a major boon for it, but overall, it just felt like that's where everything came together the best. Particularly when it came to what it was doing with the characters, because there were gradual arcs for all of the characters throughout that point, and the cast kept expanding, certainly, but it never felt like the show was losing track of that ever-expanding cast. It knew who each of the characters were, and it knew where they needed to go. And the characters, I wouldn't necessarily say they were the deepest characters in any anime series, but they had just enough to them that they weren't bland cardboard cutouts, and so you could bring them in different directions. And also the simplicity helped keep things in line. Like I said, there were a lot of characters to deal with, and if you have a bunch of characters who are too complex, you can eventually lose sight of some of them. It can become so jumbled. Not every anime can be Full Metal Alchemist, let's be honest. And Full Metal Alchemist had way more room to breathe than Symphogear. But it kept things straightforward and simple, and I think that was to its benefit when it came to the characters. And the characters really are endearing. There's no denying that. Like I said, not the deepest, but deep enough that you do care, and you do believe that they are going through these situations, and as such, you also care about what happens to them and how they get out of it. Not to mention, GX also finally gave us villains who could meet the Symphogear wielders toe-to-toe on the battlefield. Prior to that, in the previous 2 seasons, the big villains were more the puppet masters staying on the back lines who didn't really get involved physically until the very end. We didn't have any villains who were throughout the season a threat until GX. And that, I think, was also a major improvement. And that would stick around for the other 2 seasons, but, well, with the other 2 seasons, here's the thing. The character stuff wasn't as strong. It felt like they'd kind of played their best hands in the first 3 seasons, and starting with AXS, they kind of needed to figure things out. They didn't quite know where to go from there, and they did try coming up with stuff, but it never quite worked as well. And that resulted in some of the characters feeling like they were not as interesting anymore. In fact, by the time we got to XV, there were plot threads that felt like they were being introduced and dropped way too quickly. I mean, there were some things introduced in the first couple episodes of XV that I'm pretty sure did not go anywhere at all. And that was really a shame, because it felt like there was more that was supposed to be going on. And I know for a fact that the show could have done that stuff, but again, I think at that point they'd kind of exhausted what they wanted to do, and they didn't have a plan for what they could do after that. Sort of like what I think happened with Stranger Things, where they did everything they wanted to do in the first 2 seasons, and then in season 3 they were like, oh shoot, now what? We didn't plan this far ahead. Kinda like that. So with the characters stuff pushed to the back burner, the last 2 seasons wound up focusing more on the plot elements. And that was a big mistake. Symphogear is one of those shows that should never, ever have drawn attention to its plot. Because once you start really focusing on the plot, you might actually realize how stupid it is, basically. Like I said, it can win you over with how stupid it is, but that's mostly in terms of the action and just the over-the-top bizarre nature of the premise itself. When it comes to the actual story, the things that are happening, the events we're supposed to care about, I mean, it's not as if it was completely unbelievable. It was about as believable as anything else I've ever seen in anime, but it's one of those things that you're not supposed to think too hard about. The minute you start thinking about Symphogear in truly logical terms is the minute the show falls apart. And I'm pretty sure also that we also had certain things dropped on that regard as well. Like, I'm not entirely sure, I'd have to see it again, but I'm pretty sure that midway through AXS, the villains of that season, the Bavarian Illuminati, changed their plan halfway through. I don't know specifically if that's the case, or if they were just fulfilling part of their plan. But again, that speaks to the issue I'm trying to get at. the plot can kind of lose you because the plot is just that ridiculous, and it really shouldn't have been the focus. When it's focusing on the characters more than the plot, you can get invested in the characters to the point where you can buy whatever's going on in the plot because you don't care so much about what's happening, but more about who it's happening to. So yeah, that's basically why I think the last 2 seasons didn't quite measure up to the first 3. But then again, they never got worse than the first season, and the first season is still really good. 'Cause that's what I want to emphasize. Even though the show does take a downgrade, I guess you could say it did jump the shark after GX, it never got to the point where it was unwatchable. There are shows I have seen recently where I try sitting through them because I watched them up to a certain point and I really like them, but then things just get so terrible that I think, why am I still subjecting myself to this torture? This is awful. I'm not enjoying myself. I could be doing something far more productive with my time, like, I don't know, read a book or hitting myself in the head with a wiffle bat, and I would be getting more done than watching this. That's kind of how I felt after a certain while with the recent Doctor Who seasons. I was middle of the road, uncertain when Jodie Whittaker took over, and then about midway through, I dropped the show, not because the Doctor was a woman, but because the show was just so awful at that point. The writing was insultingly bad. The acting was atrocious. The special effects hadn't been that bad since the first series of Doctor Who. But that's a tangent. The point is, I will drop a show if it gets bad enough. Symphogear never got that bad. And I really do think it's worth watching all the way through to the end. It even manages to reach a pretty satisfying conclusion in spite of the downgrade. Again, it's one of those things where if you think about it too hard, it still doesn't really work, but hey, it's on par with everything else we see in the series. If you can accept the basic premise, you can accept basically anything the show does. So, yeah, Symphogear, I would say, is a show that's definitely worth watching. And I'm also happy to hear that apparently, I believe it's Discotheque Media, did license it for physical release over here in America. Sub only from what I've heard. But that means the first season, at the very least, will be available. And if it does well, maybe the rest will come too. And I hope it happens soon. It's supposed to release sometime this year. I will definitely be picking up that first season. And until that comes, I recommend that you guys check it out as well, if you're curious. Because Symphogear really is different. There's nothing else quite like it anywhere in anime. I mean, there are plenty of things that have elements. There are shared elements in different series, but Symphogear is the only show I've seen thus far that takes all those elements and mashes them into one. And in spite of itself, it works. It won me over, and I am now whatever you call a Symphogear fan. A Symphogear head? I don't know what the term would be. I don't even know if there is a term. The point is, Symphogear is worth your time. At least I think so. I loved it. And I am speaking as someone who always sort of knew about it, but didn't really care until, of all things, it was announced that a mobile game version of it would be crossing over with Godzilla. It's a weird thing to think that's how I finally checked this show out, but hey, sometimes that sort of weird thing happens. And now, I'm a fan. I really do recommend this show, and I hope it gets more attention. Because, let's be honest here, we need more action musicals where girls in armor sing their own battle themes while punching monsters. There's just something unique about that. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Oh, Chris is my favorite character, by the way. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it, as well as subscribe to the channel for more content of a similar nature. Also, check the description for links to our Twitter, DeviantArt, and Patreon pages, as well as the Amazon link for the novel Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, penned by yours truly. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.